Hello everyone, I'm Wormer from did I surprise you? I'm Wormer from Wormer Creations, and today I'm going to show you how to use Nomad Sculpt to make an Oreo. Imagine I'm holding one. I'm on a diet, so I knew if I bought one I'd eat it, so I'm trying to stay strong, so just pretend. You can pretend too. There's an Oreo there. Don't eat it though. Bad for dogs. So anyway, open up Nomad. Let's get started. So, let's open up Nomad and start sculpting our Oreo. You can play with these settings up in the top right if you want a grid or no grid. I don't usually have a grid. You can also hit the grid button down on the bottom left. We're going to go up into our scenes, select the sphere, and delete it. We don't need a sphere. As you may have guessed, we're going to start with a cylinder. So do add and then do cylinder, and the settings pop up in the center that you can alter if you'd like. I tap the radius because currently the default setting is to alter the radius of the top and the bottom circle. You can also mess with the green center dot to make it smaller or larger. If you tap cap, then that removes the planes on the end. You can tap it again and only have one open, one closed. You pretty much always want it closed. No reason to have one of the caps open. It's just going to make issues if you ever revoxel and you want a completely enclosed mesh at all times, basically. Also, I tend to 3D print things, so I definitely want it closed. On the top right, I hit background and then selected the check mark next to reference image. You can see I was trying to make Finn at one point. You can then import a picture. So I've imported a picture of an Oreo. And then you can mess with the scale, position X and position Y to move it around. You can also do an overlay if you want the picture on top and mess with the opacity. This is helpful for tracing things, but we don't really need to do that. We're going to do a lot of mostly eyeballing, but like I said, we'll be using the tube and the symmetry tool to get most of what we need. So on that little top right ball, I'm tapping front, which puts it right in the front, but then you can drag it around to get a better perspective. Also, if you want to shift this around, you tap the gizmo tool. You can also see in the top middle, the gizmo tool is now reflecting right under that center menu, and this allows you to rotate it. On the left, I've clicked snap and make sure it's at 90 degrees, and this allows you to rotate it perfectly so that the front is now facing us as a face instead of the cylindrical sides. So now, when you tap front, you get the face there, which is nice. You can then tap in the top center, the bottom there. Actually, what am I doing here now? I have hit the tube tool, and I've hit snap. What snap does on the left is this means your tube is going to always be in contact with an object behind it. So I've stretched out a tube and hit the green button, and now this object will always be stuck onto this surface. When your snap is at 0, this means the center of your tube is what's going to be in contact with the surface. So you can kind of see that the tube is halfway into the surface, and that's what we want. I also tap the dots at the top. And if you mess with, you don't have to mess with max faces, but if you reduce your division X, you can see you're messing with it to show that basically it reduces the number of polygons, and then subdivide, the post-subdivision will kind of give it a nice hot dog shape. So just mess with how many division X and how many post-subdivision gives you kind of a nice taper on the end. And that's what I'm doing there for tube. So you can see I'm just trying to get something that kind of mimics the shape there. Now that you have that, we have to replicate it around all the edges. So we'll go to our scene, click add, and then click the radial symmetry. You can see now at the top where it says the green 4, it's radiating around the y-axis. And we don't want this. We want it to radiate around the face of the cookie. So let's say you hit the x-axis, also no good. You want the z-axis. The z-axis is what's basically coming toward us, facing us. So now these guys rotate around the center, and we're going to use this to try and make them completely radial and pointing toward the center. So What I'm doing is I moved the tip to the centers, so all the tips are touching. Don't quote me on that. Then I added another spot near the edge that looks good and reduced it. Now as you can see, whenever you add a point, it automatically hits the edge of whatever you're touching. It hits the surface because we have snap on. But you see it clipped through the edge because there are only 2 points. So I have to add a third point to make sure that it's extending above the edge like they want. And now I'm adjusting this. I do kind of want these little noodles to curve over the edge because the cookie itself has these ridges on the front and they extend to the sides. So I'm now at the top. You put the pointer on the blue radial Z and move to the left or right, and this increases the number of objects that are radially symmetrated. That's a real word. And you see that I've just adjusted it until it starts to look right. If you want to be real technical, you get some measurements and counting in there, but that's not necessary. You'll just eyeball it until it looks about right. And then I make sure the length of these Oreo sausages look about good. I'm now messing with the radius to see if that needs to be adjusted. And again, this is just, you can see I'm bringing this out a little more just so you don't see the edge of the cylinder there. But this is really what sculpting is. You're just kind of messing with the settings until it starts to look like what you want. So for example here, I'm trying to add more points so it covers that edge, but you also just want to make sure everything's as perpendicular in the right way that you need. I'm sure there's ways to go in. You can double tap on the points and enter exact measurements of the radius. You can use the measure tool if you want. But really, especially for such an iconic, identifiable cookie, an object, you really don't have to be super technical to get across what you're doing. So, now that I've got my ridge here, we're going to go into where the tube is. We don't need that anymore, so we do add. And basically, at this point, we're going to add a box underneath the radial symmetry. You can see it's underneath that radial there. But what that did was create a bunch of boxes. And that's why they all filled up the whole thing, because they were spun around the center there. But I think I got ahead of myself and realized I don't want to work on those box shapes yet. I need to start with those tubes around the side. So I again hit the tube tool and I make sure, actually then I realized if I want this to be the same sort of length and width, I'm just going to clone the tube I already have. And here I'm messing with my second set of tubes because they're in the exact same spot as the first ones. You can always play around with the different visuals. Snap is still on, so it's automatically adhering to the surface, and that gives us a pretty fun effect. This is the fun of symmetry and tubes and whatnot. You can make a lot of cool geometric effects and whatnot. Anyway, you can see I pulled the tube out from the radial because it's not going to be repeated as much as the outside edge. I'm making those outer sausages, and for this I turned on and off snap to show you when you turn off snap, then you can pull it away from the object. You can extend it outward if you need. I turned it back on so that it stuck to the surface, and then I'm adding its own radial symmetry to this layer. So I just went up to the top and did add radial symmetry. And again, once that's set in place, you can tap the tube and start messing with it. So I am again at the top, tap where the blue Z is and rotate. That brief pause I took was to count the number of sausages around the edge, so this time we can get an exact count. And now we're just going to manipulate it until it matches the image again. So we are going to start moving that around and just do so until it starts to look right. There we go. It's not looking too bad. It's going to need a curve in the middle. And you can see here when you have the lowered X subdivision like we did at the beginning, sometimes it's kind of not exact way. You can see it snap between two different sizes for some reason. But just fiddle with it till it starts to look right. And again, it doesn't have to be super exact unless you're really trying to get an exact one-to-one replica. But that's not completely necessary. You can see now we're going in and we've got those tubes pretty good. So we need to add those little dots. So of course, you get to your list, do add, and make a sphere now to make those little dots there. So this is on the same radial level that we made. So it's going to create just as many symmetrical items as those sausages near the outside. This is good for us because we just need to position one of them in the right area using the gizmo tool, and it'll replicate it around just like it did for those sausages and look perfect. So moving into place, and you can see now our Oreo is starting to come together. Look how cute. And then when that's ready to go, we can take a look here. And so yes, you can see that my tube and sphere are under that radial, so they will be repeated. You can pull them out if you don't want them repeated. But currently everything's looking good as it is. I also just noticed I haven't saved yet. Now's a good time to save. But I'm not going to do that yet. I like taking risks. I'm a man of not acting very smart, I guess, if I want to be technical. So anyway, I have gone in and back to our list of objects, and I've cloned this sphere. And now what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that it's completely centered. So if you have two sets and you move them until they're right on top of each other, same with this. So what I've done is I've added a mirror that goes left and right. And so now you can see as if I had divided it in half. This one kind of shows that this is a way to figure out what's perfectly symmetrical by layering it on top of each other. This is just for me to get it a little more exact. Like I said, you can eyeball it and be just fine. But I just want to make sure this is all looking good. So, using this additional mirror, that is just a left and right mirror, divides it bilaterally, I can get it to be pretty exact looking. So, back to Gizmo, you can move this around, and if your Gizmo ever seems out of place, to the left there's a pivot icon on the left side there, and you can tap that and reorient your Gizmo tool to be perpendicular and correctly pointed at the screen. I probably do that a few times, so we'll be able to see that again. For this, I'm aligning it with the image to eyeball again and see where it's at. And now I'm going to go up to the sphere again. And yeah, you can see him again. Ooh, looks like I had to go back. I accidentally squished it a bit. So you can see at the top there's that mirror that I did just to make sure everything's exact. And now I'm deleting it because we only need our radial symmetry. We don't need a left and right mirror anymore. So what should we make next on this object? Let's take a look here. Zoom in, zoom out. Who knows what I'm doing? I'm recording this after I made this video, so I have to remember what is going on. Here we go. Now I'm making the boxes. So, while I have an object selected under the radial, I go Add, I create a box, and this again creates a box and makes it rotated around that radial symmetry. Same number of times as those outer sausages, which is what we want. So I'm bringing the center just near the edge and I'm shrinking it because we're trying to make those little box shapes with the cross lines through it. Basically the 4 triangles that are connected to make a box. Right here it looks like this because again, as you can see, there's a bunch of boxes rotated around the middle. Now I realize I can't see it very well. So at the bottom left, that little pink sphere is I tapped, and you can hit a check mark that says Paint All. And I'm just painting it a different color to see it more easily. And now that I'm moving it around, I have to figure out how to orient them. So the center of the box is underneath one of those dots. So what you can do here is I could either make a whole new radial symmetry for these guys and move the radial symmetry, which would move them around, or I can just kind of manually move them. And that's what I decided to do. I just manually move these boxes until they're oriented. And I did the trick again where I added a mirror on top of everything, a left and right mirror. And this helps me move and reorient these overlapping guys until they line up perfectly. You saw for a second there seems to be 2 squares in each spot. This is because I have added a normal mirror on top of the radial. And this just helps you with making sure everything's lined up correctly in a quick and simple way. So now it's just a matter of, again, you click the gizmo tool on the right there, which allows you to alter. Oh, if you zoom in, you can see there's a little bit of incorrect overlap. So I'm using the gizmo tool to try and overlap them, but it really doesn't have to be super exact. The human eye is not going to instantly notice if the square is slightly off by a couple degrees. But again, this just helps give you peace of mind that what you're creating is correctly angled and oriented around. So again, we're using this gizmo tool to get the size and make it extend as far as we want. Of course, you don't want them extending this much, so I use that yellow, the blue arrow that you click till it's yellow and push it back in. And I'm now going up to our list, and I've validated the box, which at that top center menu that pops up, if you click validate, then you're able to sculpt these objects even more. I'm now labeling all these because I've got so many objects. It's a little more difficult to remember off the top of my head what's what. So I've got outer hot dog, I've got outer spheres, I've got the ridge. You can just name them, whatever helps you. So we now have to make these squares resemble the ones in the picture. So I pull out my smooth tool, which is going to smooth the edges, and I select one of them, and I'm now going to go in and start to... I also realized that mirror was, again, overlapping 2 boxes at once, so I pull everything out from under that mirror, and so now when we go in and smooth, it's going to soften those edges. Now at the top, you hit that 4th icon and go to Dino Topo, which is short for not some sort of dinosaur, but dynamic topology, and hit the check mark. What this does is you control what your topology does when you're using a tool. So in this case, I reduce the number. You can see I'm just messing with it, and the boxes show the approximate size of the triangles you're going to get. So, as you can see, I increased it, and when you go to smooth and the Dino Topo is super high, you really don't see much of an effect, and this is because the triangles are too small. So what you want is to, you can see I've turned the wire off on the bottom to show you. You want to adjust the Dino Topo and get your pixels to be large enough so that it softens the edges you want. If you use the smooth tool, notice it's not smoothing the way you want. This is probably what you want to mess with. So I'm just showing you here some examples. If you adjust the Dino Topo, the dynamic topology, and you can see I'm adjusting the number. If you enlarge it and you smooth it, because the triangles are larger, you'll get a much more significant smoothing effect on edges and pointy surfaces. So really you're just playing around with it until it starts to look good. You can see here this is kind of looking good. So I'll just be layering this, and because this is under the radial symmetry, you can see all the boxes are getting softened, which is perfect. Saves us a lot of time because we're not going to do one at a time, of course. And you just keep working those edges and bringing it in until it starts to look just like the cookie we want. And again, this is just the fun of sculpting. You just work at it till it looks good to you. And next we're going to have to add those crosses. So I hit the crease tool and just carefully make a straight line right through the middle and run it over a couple times. You can see now as it's hitting those edges, it's bringing it in on the edges too, which helps it subdivide into these triangles. Make sure you rotate your camera because, as you can see, the camera was in the wrong angle and it kind of creased outward. So you're going to want to turn it towards you so that the crease sinks in correctly. And here I'm getting a little better, and if I rotate it toward me, I get those perfect subdivisions, which turns this square into these 4 right-angled triangles that are all butted up next to each other. Perfect. Looking good. This is exactly what we want. I go back to smooth, and I'm trying to reduce these ridges at the top. You can see it's looking a little balloony. So I zoom in because I don't want the crease edge to start smoothing. This helps reduce. You see it was starting to get like a little pointy almost in the center of all these triangles. And yeah, that's looking really good. And now we zoom in. You can refine the creases a bit more. And just keep looking around the model and deciding. I decided to bring it in just a little more, just so it's not sticking out as much. And yeah, as you continue with your model, you can rework whatever you need to. And now that you've added the creases, it kind of messed with the size a bit, so I'm again eyeballing some of the sizes here with the gizmo tool again. And then now that we have that ready, we need to add more dots. So I select the outer sphere, dot, 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 and click clone. And now that I have the gizmo again, I can start moving him around. So you can see I went to pivot, and again I hit center and align. That's what I mentioned earlier, because you could see the gizmo was kind of, when you clone things, the gizmo kind of goes out of whack a little bit. So you'll need to do this pretty often. On the left, I'll just say again, you hit that pivot, which is that little lock, and then it opens up new menu and you hit center and align, and that both centers it obviously and then aligns the gizmo so it's correctly oriented with the screen. This helps us keep our spheres right on the surface where we want. So as you can see, I use the gizmo to move these cloned spheres around, which are going to fill in the gaps where the other spheres need to be. Did that a couple times. And this time I'm going back to the bottom left paint tool. And now that we've added more depth to these shapes, I hit the bottom left color tool, and then you hit paint all. And now I'm realizing, well, I may as well just make it look like the cookie. So I use the eyedropper tool on my image to try and get the color I want, and hit paint all, and now it's looking more like a cookie. Looking yummy, getting hungry. Don't lick your screen. You know what? This is America. You can lick your screen if you want. I can't tell you what to do. And our cookie's looking real. So I realize now that it's dark, I need to adjust the background. So I go back up to the background, and you can pick the color you want, and this helps us see a little more. I chose blue because I think some of those Oreo ads tend to have blue in the background. And again, I mess with the roughness and metalness. This is what makes your texture a little shinier or a little duller, less reflective. And now, if you can select all, you can go back to the color and fix them all at once. And really, if you zoom in on the cookie, you can see in the picture, it's a bit shiny. So even though we know the cookie is brown or black, because the surface is actually a bit shiny, that's why in the image you can see, if you were to color drop it, some areas would be white because it reflects the light. So I'm trying to emulate that, but this isn't a tutorial yet for coloring and texturing, so this is just so it kind of looks good. You don't have to go into it this much yet. This is just going to help it look like a beautiful little cookie. So now that we have our nice outer design going, I really wonder what the purpose of all these little symbols are. They look like little Viking runes of a cookie. We need to next figure out how we're going to make the Oreo logo and whatnot. I'm still looking at those. I want to flatten these bumps a bit more, so I get the flatten tool. And believe it or not, it flattens, if you couldn't have guessed. So then I zoom in, I'm just flattening these a bit, because the crease tool kind of sunk in so much, it made these edges more bulbous than I want. So you can take your flatten tool and go into each one and just kind of flatten them down a bit. You really don't need a bunch of specialized tool for Nomad. You just need to practice with what you have. I see pretty often some really amazing sculptures, and I'm always asking them, like, what brushes did you use? Did you download any special ones? Because their sculptures are so amazing. And most of the times, people are just using the default brushes and whatnot. So far, we haven't even used the clay or the brush tool. We've just used smooth, crease, and flatten. And you can see we can get pretty far in our sculpting. So, as you can see, if I'm zooming in and out, you can just select any of these boxes to alter, and it alters all of them because they're under the radial symmetry. So, now that we have that, we need to figure out how to make the center. Excuse me, we'll edit that in post unless I forget. If you're hearing this, I forgot, and I'm sorry. I've now cloned an outer hot dog, added its own mirror, and I'm now bringing it down to make that center Oreo logo. I go back to mirror, and I engage both the X and the Y mirroring. This makes 4 of them basically from the one tube, and this is going to help us make a nice symmetrical object. You can see as if you overlap it, this helps you really make sure that it's exactly where we want it to be. So we're going to fiddle with that until it starts to look good. I have now cloned another outer hot dog and brought it in to make the lettering. You can see I pull it out from under the radial symmetry, accidentally bring it down into that mirror, which we really don't want. So I'm actually going to go back up and pull it out. But you can see if you mess with mirror and radial symmetry, you can come up with some cool patterns. So I pull it out and make it its own level. But then I'm just going to add a normal mirror left and right, and this will help me start by creating where the letters are going to be and making them look even. Oreo is 4 letters, so I'm basically going to make 4 rough shapes of where the letters will go, and then validate them, which will create 4 separate shapes I can alter separately. But obviously, with the O's on the end, I can make these guys look exactly the same. So you'll mess with the outer settings until it starts to look like a good O. And then we're going to clone this object, and I'm just going to do the same. It's basically just going to, at first, be 4 O's to, again, give me an idea of how the letters are going to fit next to each other so they're spaced correctly. Also, make sure you're saving. At this point, I still haven't saved. So you go to the folder at the top, hit save, enter your project, Oreo name, and it's there. Perfect. So now that I've gotten the O and the other O looking good, I'm essentially just going to tap them, clone them, and just move them around till I get the nice placement for where these letters will be. Amazing. Hopefully your Oreo is looking just as good so far. We're going to end the video right here and follow along for part 2 where we finish our Oreo. Also, let me know any ideas of what I should use this for as I 3D print it. Could be a fun little button, maybe a big old coaster. Give me some crazy ideas. Oreo goggles that you can't see through? Anything. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps.